So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to crunch 1400 years of Islamic history in 5 minutes and make it as exciting as I can possibly make it. So Prophet Muhammad started borrowing a lot from the Old Testament to make his religion more palpable to the Jews, to make it a lot similar.
But also the Quran mentions history in a way that really doesn't affect its message. It's so minute. If you were to take this sentence out of the Quran, it probably wouldn't make a big difference. But why is it there? The Quran mentions 2 different titles for the leader of the Egyptians. At the time of Musa alayhi salam, he's mentioned as Pharaoh. At the time of Yusuf alayhi salam, he's mentioned as Malik, king. Why the 2 different titles? The Bible always mentioned Pharaoh. The Torah always mentioned Pharaoh. All the historians of the time mentioned Pharaoh. So why is there such a difference? A minute difference. The language of the Egyptians, the hieroglyphs at that time was a dead language. The hieroglyphs was revived in the 19th century, if not the beginning of the 20th century. Think about this. Think about this. And we know for it to be true, because Pharaoh was started to mention in 14th century BC, in the New Kingdom. The old Middle Kingdom, at the time of Yusuf alayhi salam, they called him King, Malik. But no one knew that at that time. We know it to be correct today, because about 1300 years after, we learned to translate the hieroglyphs, the Egyptian language. But they never knew that at that time. So what's the best possible explanation? You can't claim now the Prophet ﷺ copied the Bible, because that means he knew what was right, left what was wrong, and took what was correct.
When they refused to accept him and follow him as the last of the prophet, that's when he turned against them and started killing them and started expelling them.
No, Islam is not anti-Jew. No, Muslims are not anti-Semitic, for the following reasons. The first is, when we go into history, we see that when the Quranic principles, the Quran being the book of the Muslims, and the prophetic traditions of the Prophet Muhammad, upon whom be peace, when they were manifested in our society, especially in history, we see that the Jews live favorably. And we can justify this by using Jewish historians and primary sources. For instance, we have the contemporary Jewish historian Zion Zohar. He said, thus, when the Muslims crossed the Straits of Gibraltar in the Iberian Peninsula, the Jews saw the Muslims as liberators from Christian persecution.
He became a military warrior and declared war on them and started expelling them. Jews and Christians became dhimmi, or second-class citizens.
Also, we have a 19th century Jewish historian, Heinrich Graetz. He said the Jews live favorably under the Mohammedans, in other words, the Muslims. We have Amnon Cohen in his 2-volume book, A World Within. He collected 1,000 judicial records under the Ottoman period. And he concluded that although the Jews had the freedom to go to the rabbinical courts, the majority of them decided to go to the Qadi meaning the Islamic judge, because they knew that justice, peace and harmony lived in Islam, lived under Islam.
Because Jews were considered najis, if a Muslim man or a Jew walked on the same side of the street, the Jew had to cross the other side so the Muslim man can walk, so he's not dirtied by the filth of the Jew.
We also have primary sources. For instance, the book by Philip Mansell called Constantinople. He cites a rabbi in 1453 writing a letter to his Jewish brothers, and he writes, "O my brethren, come to the land of the Turks, the land of the Muslims. Rich are the fruits of the earth, we're not oppressed with heavy taxes, and we live in peace and harmony.
Islam continued to grow. They went all the way to Jerusalem. They conquered Jerusalem. Christians couldn't ring their church bells in Jerusalem. Until 1967, when the State of Israel liberated Jerusalem, where Christians, Jews, and Muslims could pray under the same sky. Where Christians, Jews, and Muslims could pray under the same sky. How many people knew this history? Please raise your hand. How many people knew this history? Please raise your hand. We in America have failed to educate our children about history. We in America failed to educate our population about history. And today we talk about ISIS. ISIS is not a new invention. ISIS resurrected the caliphate that ended less than 100 years ago.
I mean, let's remember here, the people we are fighting today, we funded 20 years ago. And we did it because we were locked in this struggle with the Soviet Union. They invaded Afghanistan, and we did not want to see them control Central Asia. And we went to work, and it was President Reagan in partnership with the Congress, led by Democrats, who said, you know what, sounds like a pretty good idea.
Except we are too ignorant and too uninformed to understand what ISIS is doing and why ISIS is succeeding.
I would argue that if you really want to know what's happening with Middle Eastern policy, then you must read Oded Yanan's A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s. Now, in that document, which is pretty much being played out to a T right now and has been for many years, there were serious objectives for Israel. And Israel's main objectives were to expand and grow in line with the Greater Israel Project. And in order for it to do that, there would need to be an excuse to justify the expansion of Israel. And in order to do that, we would have to sow the seeds of sectarian hatred and violence in the region. The number one target of this plan was Iraq. We've achieved that. That's not a failure. That's actually a success. Iraq is a failed state largely. It is an absolute basket case. Sectarian hatred is absolutely insane. We see the beheadings and all of this madness, and we think it's a disaster. No, it's not at all. In fact, it's all part of the plan to break up Iraq into 3 different states. When we look at Syria, we also find that the goal is once again the same thing: sow the seeds of sectarian hatred and basically turn that nation into a basket case. This is happening according to plan as well.
ISIS is not a new invention. ISIS resurrected the caliphate that ended less than 100 years ago.
Now, ISIS, funny enough, could stand for the Israeli Secret Intelligence Service. Many people are seeing the big benefits to the state of Israel, the so-called Jewish state of Israel, by the breakup and the balkanization of the surrounding states. We've been supporting ISIS. There is absolute continuity between the policies of Iraq and breaking it up and breaking up Syria as well. It is beyond naive to suggest the U.S. doesn't have its fingerprints all over ISIS. In fact, tell me this. Why has ISIS never once, or al-Nusra Front or al-Qaeda, not once have they attacked Israel? In fact, ISIS militants are getting medical attention in the Golan Heights and in Israel itself. What does that tell you? There is absolute continuity, but the actual policy, just like the Project for a New American Century laid out very clearly, that a, quote, new Pearl Harbor would be necessary to achieve this goal of full spectrum dominance, you could never tell the American people, or the world for that matter, we're going to fight wars of aggression where we're going to have to invade and occupy, we're going to have to spend hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars to achieve the goal of full spectrum dominance, which is to control, absolute control over air, land, sea, and space and cyberspace. The American people never would have bought it, so you can't tell them that. You have to tell them a bunch of lies. By the most powerful interest there, and who is that right now? Well, that would be our best friends and allies, these little Frankenstein monsters that we create, whether it's al-Qaeda or al-Nusra Front or the latest ISIS monster that we've created. Those are the ones that are going to fill that vacuum, and that fits perfectly in line with Oded Yanan's A Strategy for Israel in the 1980s. And if these other two gentlemen haven't read that document, I seriously suggest you do. Another thing that's really worthy of pointing out is the so-called Islamic State is anything but Islamic. And yes, there is a war on Islam. Islam is very understood by many Muslims around the world to be absolutely 100% forbidden for you to forcibly convert somebody to Islam or kill them. This is totally untrue. Back in the medieval times, when there was Muslim empires, it was an absolute understanding and policy amongst the Muslims who were in charge at that time, that those who practiced whatever religion were allowed to continue practicing that religion, and they were not even forced to pay taxes into the Muslim empire itself. However, if people wanted to practice that religion, they would not be able to derive the benefits of the tax system and so on and so forth. The bottom line is no Muslim in their right mind would justify going in and literally executing men, women, and children simply because they don't convert to your religion. These people are not Islamic. They are creations of the monster, which is the empire of the United States and all its cohorts in Israel and England in particular. And this monster is purposely created to justify the continuing insanity of the never-ending war policy, which is really the core of America.
Wake up! Because if you don't stand for something as Malcolm X said, you're going to fall for everything. يا أيها الذين آمنوا استجيبوا لله ولرسوله إذا دعاكم لما يحييكم